Good morning, and thank you for joining us at the Central Asian Productivity Research Center. And thank you to the panelists and the moderators for joining us today for a timely informational event. Throughout modern history, world leaders have said that Americans are the most resilient people. We are optimistic. We dream about building the future. We have confidence in ourselves, and we have proven this in war and peace. We emerged from the Great Depression. We emerged from a devastating war and built an economy unknown to man. I remember after World War II when we overpowered some of the most powerful military forces in history. Those veterans who returned home laid down their weapons and picked up their shovels, their axes, and their picks. They began to drive huge pieces of equipment to move the earth. There were Army carpenters, Navy electricians and road builders, Air Force personnel, and Marines, all hard workers. They all began to build huge housing developments, and this was across the nation. Factories retooled to produce cars, refrigerators, and washing machines, things that most people could not afford before the war. Farmers returned to their fields, their plows, their tractors, and began to produce our unbelievable and unimaginable food supply. Many veterans who never dreamed of completing high school took the GED and entered universities. Everyone joined together in a highly productive workforce that led the march into one of the greatest economies ever developed in the history of the world. Now we are emerging from long days of darkness, days of non-production. Now it is our turn to roll up our sleeves and once again make America great. Hopefully, this timely, profit-oriented event will help you in some small way. You all know the business world is changing, and changing rapidly. The infamous virus has changed much in our lives, and that of business, government, and academia. Many company decision makers will need to review company policies, practices, and procedures, and it will be an even greater challenge for those involved in international business and trade. At this time, the Central Asian Productivity Research Center presents a timely conference focusing on the topic, Preparing for Global Trade Disruption. And at this time, it's my privilege to introduce Professor Dr. Paul Prabhaker, the Vice Chairman of the Central Asian Productivity Research Center, the organizer and sponsor of this morning's program.
Folks, welcome to this virtual conference. You've just heard from our chairman, Harry Lepinski. My name is Paul Prabhaker. I'm the vice chair of this organization, and very, very glad to add my invitation to you. We have a strong lineup of speakers willing to share their expertise with you. All I'm going to do the next few seconds is to tell you the importance of the content that's coming at you, and thank you for having signed up to be in the audience for this conference. As you know, changes come and changes go, and organizations adapt to them, and those that don't go by the wayside. CAPRC has been around for close to 20 years as a not-for-profit, and our mission is to help and uplift the Central Asian Pacific countries and their strategic intentions. Being in the middle of the largest superpower in the last century, that's the United States, we have a moral and ethical obligation to help these countries fulfill their goal for their citizens and for their country. So what you will hear in this conference will be opinions on thoughts on a variety of topics related to Central Asia, but you'll also hear issues of how do you capitalize through challenges and changes that are upcoming on a daily basis in today's world. So thank you for coming, and stay tuned. I'll be back to wrap up this conference at the very end. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow virtual conference goers. My name is Erin Cole, and I'm a member of the advisory committee of the Central Asia Productivity Research Center. And I'm also the president and CEO of the Clinton Regional Development Corporation in Clinton, Iowa. We are an economic development agency that covers a portion of eastern Iowa, but we also cover into Whiteside County, covering Fulton, Illinois, Albany, and Thompson. And Professor Lepinski reached out to me about 2 years ago and invited me to participate in CAPRC because of the fact that I have previously worked and lived in Central Asia for 4.5 years, as well as prior to that, I lived and worked in Russia for about 4 years as well. So now that I'm in Iowa, I was curious about how I can bring my knowledge and expertise to bear for companies in this area, but also continue to learn from you and from my other colleagues on the CAPRC board and those who come to these meetings and participate. So it's thrilling to get innovative and move forward with this conference virtually. Of course, we'd all love to meet in person. I was at the conference last year in Chicago on April 1st, thought it was a fantastic event. And now, of course, we're not able to meet in person. We're living in some unprecedented times, but at the same time, we're also being creative and innovative and moving forward, which is really the point of all of this. So I am here to give you your official welcome to our conference and to point out the fact that I personally think it's a really interesting topic. Preparing for global trade disruption is what we're going to be discussing today. And I think this is critically important for any number of reasons, regardless of COVID. Disruption happens on a regular basis. Right now it's COVID, but it's also because, the world is changing and markets grow and markets decline at certain points in time and for different reasons. Disruption in many ways can be a good thing. Just like I believe that change is good, disruption can also be good. This means that as things are disrupted in certain areas, we also have the opportunity to create and develop opportunities in other areas. So for example, Central Asia is a booming market right now. I think there's a ton of opportunity in Central Asia in particular. I know that there are other countries, of course, along the old Silk Road that CAPRC focuses on. I was in Turkey recently. As a matter of fact, I was in Istanbul on vacation March 7th through 14th and was going to continue on to Uzbekistan for vacation and to visit my husband's family there. And that's when the COVID situation was getting much worse, and I decided to change my ticket and come back to the United States instead. So that was disruptive. Certainly would have liked to have gone to Uzbekistan and really see firsthand what's taking place there. Turkey was looking very good, but of course their tourism sector right now is down, which is a major blow to them, and certainly trade-related issues in the tourism sector. All of those things right now are disruptive. But nonetheless, there is a ton of opportunity, and there will continue to be a ton of opportunity. So Central Asia in particular, I just want to point out a couple of recent activities that I hope you're aware of, or certainly that you could find online still, because most of them were recorded. Invest Kazakhstan is doing a fantastic webinar series that they're promoting on LinkedIn. So for any of you interested in Kazakhstan as a market, I think they're doing a fantastic job of promoting themselves and the opportunities that currently exist. So again, Invest Kazakhstan, if you look that up on LinkedIn, you'll find some recorded webinars that might be of interest to you. I'd also point out that Uzbekistan is continuing to work with the US federal government, the US Department of Commerce in particular. They have created this US-Uzbekistan informal virtual commercial dialogue. And Uzbekistan in particular is really trying to undergo a significant number of reforms in the economic sphere where they are trying to attract more inward investments. Obviously trying to open up opportunities for domestic small businesses, create more jobs. And I think this is going to be an amazing opportunity for American companies moving forward. The other thing I would like to point out is Turkmenistan, also in Central Asia, just recently applied to the WTO for official observer status. And they said that this is quite historic because Turkmenistan is the last of the 15 former Soviet republics that is now seeking a relationship with the WTO. So that could open up a lot of possibilities as well. So lots of great things going on, and thank you so much for choosing to participate today, choosing to work with us and learn more about the Central Asia Productivity Research Center. And if you have any questions whatsoever, we look forward to your opinions and your suggestions throughout this conference. I hope it's a wonderful opportunity for you And I hope to see you sometime soon in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is Paturi, President, Pan Asian American Business Council, CEO of Global Cybersecurity Initiative, and member of advisory boards of a few educational and Asian organizations. The topic for discussion today is preparing for global trade disruptions. And global trade disruptions come in all shapes and sizes, and particularly on supply chains. So what proactive strategies leading companies use to tackle the challenges of supply chain risk management? And we have Alex Mathew and Jerry Strub with me to discuss this topic. Alex Mathew, Chief Operating Officer, Biomass Energy Systems, Inc. And he is the lead for design, development, and operations management. He's managing engineering team that designs, installs, and startup of waste to energy facilities for BESI's gasification and biomethanation technologies. He's managing programs specific to research and development for energy recovery from waste materials and other non-traditional sources. Leading the technical teams on projects performed under contract with the Research Foundation of the State University of New York, U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Defense, and Air Force Research Laboratories, and Hawaii Center for Advanced Transportation Technologies. So it's developing cooperative research and training programs with universities and nonprofits, including Governor State University, Sunny Research Foundation, and PSG College of Technology, India. So lead for project management, data development and analysis, operations and maintenance of equipment, controls, programming, design and implementation, and extensive reporting on all aspects of programs. He's a specialist speaker at several waste to energy instrumentation and process control conferences. Prior to that, Alex was at Ducon Instruments as a design and applications engineer, and at Clean Air Engineering, R&D and applications engineer. So next, Jerry Strub, CEO of Strategic Growth Consulting. Jerry Strub has been active in the environmental clean tech industry for 39 plus years. He started as a laboratory field chemist for a small environmental firm performing emergency response, project management, and laboratory analysis. He rapidly progressed through business development, marketing, and sales and operations management roles over the next 15 years with the division of waste management. He spent the following 15 years working for Western Solutions, an environmental engineering and consulting firm focused on strategic, domestic, and global growth initiatives. His global experience includes extensive time with China, Taiwan, and India. Today, he is the Chief Executive Officer of Strategic Growth Consulting, a management consulting firm that assists global professional and technical services organizations in identifying growth opportunities, developing a sound plan, and aligning the organizations to execute using a collaborative process. SGCI supports existing domestic small to medium technical companies searching for China market entry, additional capital, and or exit strategies. SGCI works with Chinese environmental firms and investors searching for North American clean tech, environmental investment, or partnering opportunities. Jerry is an advisory board member of 2 Chinese environmental firms. So in the beginning of 2019, Jerry also took on the role of a senior manager, strategy and business development for GZA, Geo Environmental. So looking at our topic, trade disruptions. So the 1980s was a devastating time for American farmers, considered the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. So the early 1970s provided the catalyst for 1980s crisis via Nixon soybean embargo and Russian grain transactions in wake of currency changes, inflation, and other changes. So Jerry, what did we learn from past trade disruptions and what has COVID-19 taught us about trade?
In the past, we've, in the 1980s and early 1990s, the environmental and clean tech industry was mostly focused and concentrated in North America and in Western Europe. So a lot of the trade disruption and interactions there didn't really impact the industry as much, other than between the North America and the Western Europe. They kind of independently grew, but we kind of grew separately. When you look at the more emerging growth companies or countries outside of North America and Western Europe, at that time, most of them were just beginning to form their regulations. They were coming up with ideas, and they sought recommendations and partnerships with the Western world to be able to advance theirs and learn the lessons, so they didn't have to relearn a lot of the stuff that we did in the Western world. As far as COVID-19, the only really impact I've seen this year is the discussions on tariffs in the US for some components of solar panels. And many times those solar panels, things were actually dropped or exempted. So there hasn't been a lot of impact on there. Now, as far as the focus goes, maybe some of the projects might have gotten delayed a little bit, but I have not seen COVID-19 impact the interactions between North America and the rest of the world.
Okay. Alex, so you are in the sustainability field with your research and company background. How do the trade disruptions affect sustainability efforts worldwide?
Thanks, Kasi. Thanks, Jerry. Your comments on what is happening in the world are pretty spot on. In terms of trade disruptions, other than the major conflict, or you can call it even disagreement, between the United States and China, trade has actually reached a sort of a plateau in terms of agreements. A lot of agreements are in place. They've been working well. In the sustainability field, there have been tremendous growth or tremendous advancement in sustainability in different parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia or Asia, and of course, the United States and Europe. They have reached proportions of not going back from where they are. Definitely programs that have been in place, such as environmentally responsible behaviors, production, changing types of materials to be more sustainable, all that have been there for a while, and they're not going away. However, what we see are two major areas of sustainability that will be significantly affected by, not only by COVID-19, but also by the way business is being done. The first one is food. The way food is being produced and distributed and consumed was becoming more and more commercialized. There is, of course, a big movement for locally grown food, but let's be honest, the major food consumption still comes from your grocery store. It's packed and it's delivered to you by trucks from farmers from other countries. That will change significantly. There's going to be a much more increased processed food that's going to come into the picture. As food gets more tightly inspected, more packaged, more processed, people are going to be more are going to feel more comfortable eating and depending on processed food than they did in the past. There have been anecdotal evidences, but what we have seen in the industry with sustainability, food sustainability, is that even the most sustainable grocer, Whole Foods, some of the local farm stands, they're all wrapping their food. You can't just hand somebody a tray of food anymore. It has to be packed. So food and packaging together is going to see a whole different industry growth or change, let's put it that way. And that's something that food industries have to deal with. The other bigger problem, or bigger, in some cases, an opportunity, is the growth of plastics. I have a slide here, which I would like to present. Please give me a minute.
Mhm.
So if you look at the recycling trade from the United States, when we talk about recycling, we talk mostly about plastics that are baled, sorted, and sent outside in the United States, or consumed within the United States. However, if you look at where America sends its plastic waste, it's a significant trade industry. It's mostly Southeast Asian countries, as you can see, just because there's better relationships, of course, and also there is a lot of manufacturing that happens in these areas. You can see that other than China, there are some very large, densely populated countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam and other places. And this plastic export from the United States has steadily dropped. That means that since 2012 to 2019, we have seen the plastic export decrease by almost 50%, and especially in February. So our industry, the plastic industry, has seen significant changes. And what COVID-19 brings is an even bigger disruption because of two things. Let me just get back to the slide here. Yeah, because of two reasons. One is the increased use of plastics. Everything is wrapped in plastics, starting with your masks, which are, even though they say they are textiles, they're actually plastic. There are very few, only about 10% of textiles are natural fabric like cotton, but even they are interspersed with plastics. So there's a huge increase in plastics. So plastic growth is expected to grow by 50 to 80% in the coming years because of COVID-19. And increased wrapping of food, increased wrapping of everything, packaging, and of course, medical related supplies. So as this growth, trade export of plastics has decreased, the growth there has been tremendous growth in the United States of these plastics. So the question is, where do they all go? It means the United States has to face a significantly larger burden of dealing with its plastics and its waste materials, which would have been exported. And we see that that's, from a sustainability viewpoint, the United States has to deal with it head on. Many recycling companies are going out of business. That means plastics are ending up in landfills. And some states like North Carolina, landfills are full. Then we will not be allowed to bring plastics to the landfills. So there's going to be a tremendous change in the attitude. So this, again, to reiterate, food, how we consume, produce, consume, and distribute and consume food is going to change. And the plastics use and production and use of plastics and recycling of plastics is going to significantly change.
Okay, Jerry, you have any comments?
I do. I've been following the plastics issue too, as well, Alex, a lot, and I agree with, and I appreciate having that chart up there earlier. because one of the bigger impacts that most people know about in the industry was the impact of China by law and by trade law, directly saying they weren't no longer going to take most plastics and other types of waste from other countries. Obviously, that was a huge impact. In the solid waste industry in the US, a lot of companies were bundling it up, or they were trading them to groups that were then packaging them up in sea containers and shipping them to China for processing and separation. And they had large scale operations. Since, I think it was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, Alex, since they made those changes in China, a lot of it's been stacking up. So now a lot of municipalities as well as private companies are trying to find out where to direct those plastics to. And unfortunately, a lot of it, if they don't have a good valid outlet, or it's not really clean plastic, it's going back to the landfill again. Second one is some sort of either heat, straight incineration, but usually some kind of combined heat generation, waste to energy type of process is also there. Unfortunately, we still have NIMBY in the US, and there's a lot of people that are concerned with the incineration or the heating process. There's a company called Govanta, and they're having a lot of pushback in New York trying to develop a new facility. So the plastics is a big issue. The people that come up with solutions are good. I've actually had a Chinese investor and business developer that was working with a Chinese company that did that in China, and they're now looking at the business model of trying to move their operations to somewhere in Africa to be able to set up and operate based on what they've learned and the equipment they have. And they're kind of looking for feedstocks is what he was asking for based on my 39 years. And I told him, I said, I think that, I definitely have contacts that would have feedstock looking for outlets, but you better have a very good business plan. They better be able to talk about how they, kind of ESG component, the social governance and the environmental impact in Africa. They better be able to answer those questions or no one's even going to talk to them.
Okay, so what are the other risks, other emerging risks in business today?
Again, in the professional services, it's not really new risk. It's just understanding that's the way the business model works. And there's a lot of knowledge, accumulated knowledge in the environmental industry. We started 40, 50 years ago on cleaning air, cleaning water, cleaning soil, those type of solid waste management. And there's a lot of the emerging countries are trying to learn from that. One of the things companies that they go outside of the Western world into the emerging countries expecting great revenues and be able to do that. The thing you have to keep in mind is that once they learn, they don't really need you anymore. Okay, so they're going to learn the processes, they're going to learn to do it. And so your value to them is going to be less unless you're bringing in some other kind of new knowledge or something, or investment capital into the process. So there's going to be less and less of the demand as the industry grows in the other countries. So you have to keep that known in your business model that you're going to do that. And we all see the rise of nationalism just about every country in the world right now. So being able to do that within your own country, the pride of being able to do that. I'm seeing even the companies that I've been a board advisor for too. One of them has already sold out to a larger one in China, and they've moved on to another industry. And the other one is pretty well stabilized and hasn't really had to rely on my relationship. They've already got relationships, so they've already got the business models or equipment and things they need in China now. So there's less and less dependence on the Western world.
Okay, yeah. So Alex, so any thoughts?
You're right about Jerry, that what you said about the nationalism. In fact, last night I was talking to somebody in China about a project, and the tendency of countries to be self-sufficient has come out into the open right now. People are in every country, whether it's China, India, especially the larger ones, China, India, Russia, all of these countries are trying to, make in the country slogan, if it's not overt, it's there somewhere in their mandate. So there is a lot of that feeling. However, I think as Jerry said, the relationships that you build for trade is not just about goods or even services. It's about knowledge. And the last 30 years has seen growth in the knowledge tremendously. I mean, we have seen China, of course, rise, but also other countries benefiting from this kind of knowledge transfer. And trade in knowledge is going to significantly increase because people are now going to spend more time in their offices. At least I am. I mean, I'm sure you all are. We are spending more time reading, which is a good thing. Our meetings are very scheduled, so we tend to spend less times in meetings per se, and we do more discussions. So all that is great because knowledge is something that can be passed on quite easily through our online services. And then I see that also in the next generation, even my own son, they're becoming more and more aware of these kind of connections across the world, and that you don't have to physically travel to make that connection. However, for us who are in the field of physical connections, I can't run a project in another country unless I'm there. I need to make myself available. It is a challenge. So we'll see whether this translates to any kind of long-term risks, or will that get dissipated, say, by next year. But I'm positive, and I'm thinking positive at this stage.
Cassie, one thing I wanted to add is something I'm going to be watching is the continued emergence and fast growth of ESG investment. So capital flows are now directing even the BlackRocks and the huge firms, the multi-billion-dollar funds, are asking about the ESG questions to the people that they're investing in, to the companies, to the firms, to the organizations, and the efforts that they're investing in. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the flow of capital. For instance, if a country has a poor environmental record or a poor social governance, the way they manage minorities or something like that, will that reduce the flow of outside investment capital or foreign direct investment in those countries? Don't know the answer to that yet, but that's something to keep an eye on.
Right. Yeah. So, Alex, what are the effects on trade in recycled materials, especially as more countries ban recycled plastics being imported due to fear of infections and hazards?
So as I mentioned in my slide earlier, the growth in plastics in every country is going to be tremendous, and recycled materials too. I mean, plastics is one of the #1 recycling material, but there are others that are recycled. However, the recycled materials were typically exported from various countries to places like China and Indonesia. The lack of those materials, availability of those materials, would mean that there would be more consumption of oil, because plastics come from oil. So which means that the consumption of oil should go up, and prices of oil should rise over time, but may not be that fast. So we might see a negative effect on recycling overall, because the cost of oil is low, and it's easier to use virgin plastic than virgin material in many cases than using recycling. Cost of transportation is low. Shipping containers are going empty back and forth. So all this might affect in the short term the recycling business and the trade in recycling business. But as Jerry pointed out, there are other considerations. Companies are being asked to have positive to positively think about their impact on the environment, on the local communities. So there might be some change in the short term and how this happens, how this plays out. But in the long term, this might make the recycling industry of every country more sustainable. They might tend to build more recycling plants and build more recycled material processing facilities within the countries. But there are pitfalls to that in the sense that the technology and the transfer of such technology still takes time. So we'll see how that plays out in the next couple of years.
Okay. So Jerry, what is it?
I believe the next question was how do businesses need to manage things differently? And I mean, I think as we evolve out of, one of the things the pandemic has taught the whole world is that we do need to look at our supply chain for being able to respond to those. There's always a balance of how much do you invest? How many respirators and masks do you have sitting in storage that, you know, if they're not used for 10 years, may not be valid. There's that whole balance between, I believe the policy is how many deaths versus when does business return kind of thing. I think that's an issue that each country, I think there's going to be some lessons learned there. I think everyone's talking about, depending on what industry sector you're in, I've been listening to economists for the last 2 months. I try to attend as much to hear about what's going, you know, what their opinions and thoughts are. Commercial real estate in the urban areas, is the office space going to go away because everyone's going out there? They say there may be some impacts and changes. That I haven't heard anybody say it's going to go away. It may be less people density in those kind of issues. Maybe it may be more dispersed where some people go into the offices and others will go to local places like a WeWork or something like that, so they don't have to commute and they can keep separate. But there's an impact to commercial real estate. A lot of it's going to be immediate right now, but eventually it's going to come back. The retail world was already starting to crumble, brick and mortar versus the online delivery services. That's not going to change. That's probably accelerated some of that, those kind of areas. Again, I have not seen a big impact from the pandemic in regards to the environmental industry. People still generate garbage. Still people are, you know, have industrial waste issues. People still are interested in water. Most corporations, only some construction projects, maybe some green construction got delayed because there was bans on construction in certain cities or states, depending on how their individual regulators took the approach. But in the most part, it's not there. Now, if you were a company that was providing professional services in mostly the commercial real estate and it was tall buildings, you might be impacted. But if most of your client base was dealing with warehousing and logistics companies, your business is going to grow even faster because there's going to be more logistics warehouses built and more systems built and things like that. So it's a matter of where your client sector and divisions are. If you hopefully we'll see in the U.S. Some more infrastructure bill coming out in the next 60 days, where they're going to specify spending more money on certain kind of infrastructure as a way to generate jobs and improve the economy. If you're a company that's involved with those whether it's transportation or other kinds of infrastructure, then you might be well positioned to be able to benefit from that. So you need there's been a continuous evolution. I too have 2 millennials for children, and so I see the way they consume things as well. They're more into the organic foods. They get Amazon boxes every day, where my wife and I have been forced to maybe get 1 or 2 a week these days. So I learn from them all the time about how they look and view things. And whether I agree or disagree, there's a lot more. They're the growing workforce, and they're the ones that are going to be making the decisions. So pay attention.
Okay. So we are all going through that, learning from the millennials.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay, Alex, what impact will the trade disruptions have on your projects in different countries and regions?
Yeah. So just to pick up on where Jerry left, which is about having to manage things differently, we have to. One of the key things that we have seen in our company, because we were already working remotely, we had offices in Europe, we have people in India, we have people here in the US, we have a branch, an office and a representation in China. Is that remote access is absolutely critical. So where we were just talking about meetings like these, having a Zoom meeting, now it's also the information and access to this information have to be 24/7. You can't just say, I'm going to have an office that's open only from 9 to 5. Banks have to change the way they do the business. Just an anecdote. We wanted to open a bank account for a nonprofit that we had just started. And I was out at a local branch. I won't name the bank. But to start the bank account, they wanted you to come in. I mean, you have to be physically present to start a bank account. As opposed to Singapore, where we did start a bank account, everything was done online. We had a video call. All the documents were verified. I had to hold up my passport to show that I am who I am. I had to hold today's newspaper to show that it is today the date and it's not a recording or an AI. And they did that complete setup online without me being in Singapore. So that kind of access, that kind of change in the way you do business will have to come, and it will have to come very soon in industries like banking and in the medical sector that have been resistant to those changes in the past. So what I say is, if you're a business, if it's a project, for example, we have projects all over the world, I would like to have cameras everywhere. I want to be able to access the feed everywhere. I want to be able to know the data at any given time. So remote access of knowledge and information is going to be our focus for our company and for almost every company going forward. Without that remote access to knowledge and information, you can't do business in this new world.
Okay, so Jerry, any comments?
No, I agree. Anybody who's been involved in global business, such as the members that are part of this panel, I've been working at a home office or a hotel or an airport for 25 years. I'm used to having my call with India early morning. I'm used to having my calls with China at 8 or 9 p.m. because of the 12, 13, 14-hour time difference. I'm used to trying to figure out a best time to connect Europe, China, and the US on a joint call. So those of us that have that experience, we got a lot better tools than we did when we started out 15, 20 years ago. But it's not that big of a transition. But there's a lot of people that have never been exposed to that. So this is a big transition for them and how to do that. I think it'll be interesting to watch how education continues. My wife being a teacher, she's a strong believer that the best way for education to occur is in a face-to-face manner. But if you can't do that in a pandemic, going to online is a shift. Some people will do well in that, but there's a lot of people that will be left behind. And there's even some people looking at secondary or looking at college education as to whether they want to delay 6 months or 12 months because they have to do this. So I think there's a lot of impacts that we've got to look at. And as this one economist said today, it's best not to predict anything more than 30 days out right now because everything's evolving.
But just to add to that, I mean, the lack of physical access to certain countries like India and China and even Europe has impacted our projects tremendously. We have had to replace an entire team in one of the countries with local people. Two of our engineers were supposed to go out there next month. That's not happening. I was supposed to go to China late in June. I'm sorry, late in May. That didn't happen. So we are having to deal with that, and that's costing us time and money because we were used to giving out knowledge or protecting our knowledge by being there physically to make sure things work the way they were supposed to, but it's not happening. So air travel, restoration of air travel will also be an important turning point as we move forward. The day we have air travel restored, we can breathe a sigh of relief, in at least from physical access to projects.
And I also, one thing I'll add is that the reason that I've been able to keep things going is because I already had that physical face-to-face relationship built. It's really hard to build new relationships.
Exactly.
Okay, with that, let's switch gears to our another topic in our panel, that is the logistics side. So, Alex, so how should companies plan for changes in logistics in this new world order?
The simple fact of trade and transportation being complicated by lack of transportation. I mean, airlines are moving away from flights that used to have people in them to transporting, Amazon packets, I guess. That itself is a significant change. So the good thing is that companies are becoming more agile. They are starting to realize that you need to stock items locally, if possible, and deliver them as you need. You can't afford to have a big central warehouse somewhere in another country and then just ship a container load of stuff. You need to start shipping smaller quantities if necessary, if it's a consumer item. In terms of managing this logistics, artificial intelligence and computer software, these are it's a huge leap forward. Of course, Amazon is leading the way, but there are other companies that are delivering based on demand. When we get into manufacturing, I know one of my associates works with a manufacturing company. They have switched their manufacturing inventory or the raw material inventory to a completely mobile-based inventory, where everything is tracked just like your packages. Every piece of material is tracked until it's machined and completed and delivered. So logistics, I think it's going to be a beneficial stage for logistics because things are going to get more streamlined and more automated. Jobs might get lost, but at the same time, there'll be new knowledge-based jobs that'll come into the logistics market. But every company has to deal with it differently, especially when you're in manufacturing, which involves processing of raw material to deliver the final product versus just taking something that is already available and just wrapping a package around it and delivering it, which is what Amazon does. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's a good challenge. It's a new age in logistics and delivery.
Okay, some trends I think we need to look for logistically. One, the continued growth, as I mentioned before, just in the U.S. of local distribution.
Yeah.
There's opportunities that'll continue. There's going to be more warehouses. There's going to be more distribution. It also creates opportunities because usually even those distribution centers need somebody for the last mile. And a lot of even Amazons and others are actually outsourcing that to small and minority businesses to create their own last mile delivery. Some of them even have prime vans, but they're really a third party logistics. They're a third party that's doing that delivery. So it's creating opportunities. Outsourcing or reshoring, which means moving some international manufacturing back to the U.S. was already starting to grow a little bit. I think that's going to accelerate a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a big, it's not going to be a huge change, because we're still going to be a global world as far as getting products and depending on those logistics. But I think there's going to be more reshoring of manufacturing in the US, so meaning creating plants locally. I think especially automotive and some other industries are going to have to rethink their planning on just-in-time delivery. If they were dependent on the global supply chain, they get it there, and then there's disruptions like this. Just think if there was no impact in the US, or there was no impact to say the demand of autos, but they couldn't do it because they couldn't get enough bumpers, or they couldn't get enough switches, or they couldn't get those type of things. They've learned their lesson there. It's about just-on-time delivery. So I think there's going to be some rethinking about how they do logistics and how things get there. Again, AI and other things can be helpful and predictive, but usually AI can't predict a pandemic. So even then, I think that there's going to be some challenges that way. Also, in the agricultural market, I'll also put in, there's a growing push for farm to table, if you've heard of that term before, and that is it's grown locally, so it has both, it's contributing to the community, it has low transportation or carbon emissions to get it delivered to the area. So there's people that are doing small outsourcing farms for things. There's a relook at vertical farming if they can ever figure out how to do it cost efficiently. So there may be some non-GMO options, those kind of things that may affect the food and the production market logistically.
Okay, I think we are close to running out of time. If you have any closing statements, maybe it's the last 1 minute. So, Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Gussie, and thanks to the Central Asian Productivity Research Council for having this discussion. What we have learned is that we have to have an open mind about where we are going forward. It can't be, you can't predict what you're going to do, but definitely you can focus on improving your capabilities. And I find that knowledge and communication are the top two top two items that are stable during any change. If you have good knowledge, people with good knowledge, and you have good communication among your team and with your customers or your vendors, that goes a long way.
Jerry?
I will second the communications. It's very important these days. I have both the diversity in people, countries, other types of things, inputting on how you approach things. But I am an eternal optimist. So I believe that whenever we have challenges like this, that it actually creates opportunities. So it's a matter of being able to manage the direct negative impacts, whether it's cash flow in your business or delays on things. You do have to do that right away. But meanwhile, you need to have your team thinking about how can we help others with the impacts they're having, what value can we create, and how does that create new opportunities, whether it's a different business model or it's a new service offering or it's something like that. I believe that it can create a lot of opportunity, and it'll be different. It's gonna be a little bit different, but people a couple of years from now will be talking about, you remember that pandemic thing, what we had to do, and we'll be in a slightly different world. I don't know if we'll be shaking hands anymore, and you can't do the hugs anymore when you greet everybody, but it'll be an exciting new world, just a little bit different.
Okay, then, yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Jerry and
Thanks,
Alex,
Gussie.
the team.
Welcome to a panel discussion on exports. It's a conference hosted by the Central Asian Productivity Center. And the panel today consists of 3 individuals who have extensive experience in international trade. My name is Poplawski. I am a board member of the Central Asian Productivity Center. But our distinguished speakers will be Captain Shahid Naseer and Jafer Hasnain. Just a very, very brief introduction on our panelists. Captain Shahid Naseer is an expert mariner, which means he sailed major ships and is an expert in international exports and shipping with extensive experience around the world. He is also the chairman of our Maritime Committee and also associate board member. He's also the president and CEO of SHAARS International, which is an export management company. Mr. Jafer Hasnain is a managing principal of Spire Advisors. It's a company also with extensive experience in international trade and specifically renewables energy and investment capital management. Jafer is also the associate member of the Central Asian Productivity Center and has been involved with our organization for quite some time. My name is Poplawski. I am the chair of the Energy Committee and also on the advisory board member. I run a company called US Global Energy, which also focuses on development of international and domestic renewable energy projects. Today we're focusing on exports and specifically in the new developments with pandemic. So I will just turn it over to our colleagues and specifically with the first question would be to Captain Shahid. Since you know how international shipping is indicative of international trade, what have you seen and most recently? Any trends?
Oh, well, good morning to all of you. First of all, thank you for having me here this morning. I'll try to answer your questions as best as I can. As far as the shipping is concerned, of course, there has been a downward trend in the shipping, not because the products or services were not needed, but because of the COVID-19, there were so many restrictions that was placed. Some of the fear of the ports that any crew that comes into a port and they have COVID-19, they were just kind of screening those ships. There was a lot of tankers that were already afloat, and then the tanker market crashed, and there's still some of the tankers loaded with the crude. In addition to that, I mean, if you look at shipping overall, shipping is not just one segment anymore. It consists of so many different segments, like tanker market is separate, the container market is separate, break bulk is different, general cargo is different, and then if you throw the cruise industry in there, it's all a specialized field, and every industry has been impacted one way or the other. As far as the cargo movement is concerned, that is more on the cargo ships, which are subcategorized as tankers, dry bulk carriers, containers, ro-ro vessels, and then the cruise industry. Cruise industry, of course, that has taken the biggest hit because there is no more travel, there is no more excursion, and people are just afraid to go out. And as a result, that industry has tanked completely. I just explained about the tanker market. The container market has been slow because most of the production facilities in most of the countries were shut down for quite a bit. As the segments are opening for business, you will see a slight upsurge but 2020 is still not looking very good. Just to give you an example, majority of the ports, even the port of Los Angeles, which is one of the busiest ports, and it handles millions of TEUs a year, they have even shown that there is a downward trend in handling of the containers. Some of the ports have gone to the extent where they have even closed down because they just don't have enough cargo to handle. Now, the only, surprisingly, the only port that has seen an upsurge during the COVID-19 is the second largest and busiest port in Europe. That is the port of Rotterdam. Sorry, Antwerp. Antwerp has seen like a 4% increase in the cargo handling. But overall, everything has slowed down. There are hundreds of thousands of seafarers that are stuck on ships. They cannot travel back home. There's no crew change. Supplies on ships are affected. So the picture so far is not looking that good, but things have started to improve a little bit.
Thank you. Jafer, would you like to add a little bit, maybe how that could also impact renewable energy? Because as you know, renewable energy is fine, but every piece of equipment, be it a turbine or solar panels and such, consists of hundreds of products, which in turn have to be not only delivered, but manufactured and bought. So how do you see the effects cascading into the renewable energy, which has been really flying high?
So thank you, and thank you everyone for being on, and thanks to you all for having me on. Obviously the economy has shrunk globally in a massive way. What is interesting about energy, renewable energy as well as in general energy, is that there's a lot of inventory that's built into the system. Whether it's in the US because there are certain tax benefits expiring at the end of 2020, or there were tax benefits that expired at the end of 2019, where folks grandfathered themselves into more lucrative levels and had a mandate to build the projects by the first quarter of 2020. That was allowed to be pushed back. So there was a lot of inventory in the system. And that, for the most part, has bailed out, if you will, at least in the US, the renewables industry, because there's no shortage of parts. In fact, prices are down. Despite the tariffs, prices are down because there's quite a bit of inventory in the system. Now, as a practical matter, that's not true everywhere in the world. We work in certain sub-Saharan African countries like Ghana. We work in certain Asian countries, and their shipping has been really impacted. In particular, there's certain key components that have to be air freighted on occasion for certain products. And boy, getting air freight across is very, very, very hard right now. It's expensive because flights have stopped. And if you're going to air freight something from point A to point B, you're going to have to charter a plane most likely. So that is a real problem. And rates are at levels that are so high that it's practically not feasible. You wouldn't do it. You'll wait 6 months. So that's what's going on. But yeah, it's the closing of the logistics system in general has caused an impact, but really outside the US. In the US, we see no issues at all getting supply. Now, if this continued for another year, then I think the discussion would be quite different.
Excellent, interesting observations. Shahid, you've also dealt with a number of companies that rely or hope to expand on exports. So it kind of follows the whole idea of international trade. are companies still able to fulfill their obligations, let's say if they were buying something from a US company? Or have you seen a lot of order cancellations? Or is it because, like Jafer was mentioning, it's difficult to deliver it competitively?
I think that depends on the industry, by industry basis. Some of the, like Mr. Hasnain said, that there are certain segments of the businesses where they are not impacted as badly. Things are available, but particularly the companies that were just relying on GIT, just in time fulfillment of parts, they are affected the most because, like Mr. Hasnain said, it's very difficult to find. If you look at all the major airlines, they've cut down their flights by 90%. So the passenger planes were carrying a significant amount of cargo. Now there are many companies that are forced to bring in parts by air freight, and air freight has gone significantly high. If for example, if I send 2 pallets of freight from Chicago to Kuwait, I'm looking at about 3,000 to 3,500, based on what the commodity that I sell and the weight that I put on those pallets. I'm looking at about $3,500 to ship 2 pallets. That has gone up, which was the historical rate. Now, if somebody was used to getting the products by ocean freight and the availability of containers is becoming questionable, there are ships that are stuck, they cannot meet the liner run, then people are forced to bring it by air. I can get a whole container from here to Kuwait for $3,000, which is like 10 pallets. So there's a significant difference there. But the products that I handle, I have not seen any shortages. So I do not have a first-hand experience as far as the shortage of the products. The demand has been there, despite the COVID and many countries going either on curfew or lockdowns or smart lockdowns, whatever they call it. But the fact of the matter is that majority of the industries have been affected. And unfortunately, this is not going to stop here, because the trend that I'm seeing now, because there are many ships that are laid up, there are many airlines that probably will not come back to business. The capacity is automatically going to shrink. And as a result, the freight rates are going to go up. Now, for the older tonnage, for example, ships, there is a trend now that all the older ships, the ship owners are kind of forced to either scrap them or put them on some inland route, so that the newer tonnage can be used to their full potential. The shipbuilding orders have reduced by as much as 50% for this year. So all the new shipbuilding, so it's going to have an effect on the shipbuilding industry also. So overall, it has impacted the supply chain. We live in a global economy, and it's not that, okay, we are making a car in USA and we can complete that car without any problem because everything is made in USA. There may be many parts in that car that may be going that are either produced in China or Malaysia or someplace else. And if those guys cannot fulfill the parts that we need to complete that car, then that car cannot come in the market. Driving around, I can see that it is already having an impact on the auto industry. If you look at the car showrooms, you find fewer cars in the showrooms now. So that just tells me that the availability of cars is also going to go down, because there has been kind of slowdown in the supply of parts for the auto industry.
Thank you. The next question is for both of you, but I'll first ask Jafer for a comment. Do you think this development will create a trend of more local in-country production to reduce such international interdependence? Jafer, what do you think?
Well, look, I think you're onto something. And as we talk about all of these things, we've got to recognize what's going on in the world and what's going on in the world prior to COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19, the world was deglobalizing, which is a shorthand way of saying we're going from just-in-time inventory to just-in-case inventory, which is a very, very poorly defined concept. People have got to figure out, what does it mean just in case? How much just in case? There are real dollar impacts to all of this. So we've got deglobalization, which is basically just in case inventorying. You've got a subset of that, which is not localization as much as regionalization. And that regionalization can be geographic, i.e. we'll do more of the stuff in the US or more in Canada or more in Mexico, places that are closer to us that you could run a train back and forth rather than having a ship or a plane. And then you have the other kind of regionalization, which is a political regionalization, which I'll come back to in a second. The other point to make here is we are living in a world that is very overtly, when times get tough, what happens? It becomes my family first, my nation first. You can call it nationalism, you can call it a rational response to difficult situations, economic or otherwise. That's what we're in. What we've also got to recognize, and this ties into political regionalization, is the fact that China is a growing geopolitical power. We're just gonna have to figure this out. And the US is, frankly, figuring it out, rightly or wrongly, starts, whatever. We're not debating that. But the reality that China is a rising geopolitical power is something that the world and we are going to have to deal with. As we do that, that's what I meant about political regionalization. Do we, create these geopolitical blocks where we're only trading with them as preferential partners for, strategic goods or whatnot, although I guess you could argue everything is a strategic good. So these are all things that are being figured out right now. I think the practical reality of life is that we're going to get, if not localization, but regionalization. We're going to get it. We are beginning to see that on the services side. If you notice, there's a lot of call centers that are now being repatriated to the US because people are figuring out how to do it. There's more automation, robotics, artificial intelligence makes the US product, if you will, attractive. It's cost effective and it's right here. So I think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't call it localization. I would call it regionalization. And I think it happens across the board. I don't think it's going to be just for strategic goods because it is nearly impossible to define what a strategic good is. I mean, is the plastic for water bottles a strategic good? Some would say no, I would say yes. So, I'm giving you a flavor of where this all goes. So yes, I agree with you, but I would rephrase the question a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. No, excellent observations. I absolutely think you're correct. Captain Shahid, what are your thoughts on this?
I think Mr. Hasnain has expressed his opinion in a very, very fine way, where it's very clear which way the world is headed. The only thing that I would like to add to it is that it depends on the industry that you're in and the region that you're in, because some of the regions they are not capable of, so far, And that does not mean they cannot be. They're not capable of producing everything, you know. So there may be some localization or regionalization, but they will always be dependent. Now, for example, even in US, there has been talk about bring the US jobs back. But I was reading a very interesting article the other day. I can't remember who was the author, but they said that, okay, we keep talking about bringing the jobs back here, but which jobs are we talking about? The bottom line is some of the jobs have gone, and those plants have disappeared because those parts are being made elsewhere. Either they're made in China or elsewhere, in order to promote more US manufacturing. If we impose tariff on China, does that help US manufacturers build more capacity here? No. Those production facilities, they move to either Vietnam or India or places like that, you know. So it's a fine line there, you know, where whether the motivation from the manufacturer or private sector is there to bring the jobs back and support the local economy or the regional economy, like Mr. Hasnain said. But necessity is the mother of invention. You know, if we have to bring those jobs back, and we have to, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. I think the market will correct itself, and but I think the silver lining here is that some of those countries that so far have not had any desire or motivation to build their infrastructure and produce things locally, they are even stopping now and thinking that, okay, if the supply chain is disrupted, how can we meet the needs of our people, and what can we do so that this does not affect us so adversely in future?
Thank you.
Ron, may I jump in?
You
May I
absolutely,
add
please.
something? You know, one of the major areas of trade is, you know, we think in terms of like physical produced goods and services. Food is a massive item of trade. And it is by definition strategic, because if you can't feed your people, you will not be in power. That's just a fundamental rule. So what I suspect people are going to try to do is try to become more food independent, at least regionally. These are very difficult questions. You know, we've spent 70 years post World War II in a world of essentially just-in-time inventory, right? We can get all the chicken we want from Tyson. The world says we can get all the chicken we want from Tyson, or a few others. The world says we can get all the wheat and corn from the Midwest. Well, maybe, maybe not. By the way, the flip side of that is, and I work with some large farming communities on renewable energy, oddly enough, where they have stockpiles and stockpiles of soybeans. Okay, well, they grew soybeans to export to China. All of a sudden, China's not buying. So all of this has got to get figured out in a way that people need to very carefully reflect. And those who get the answer right are going to be real winners. There is massive change going on right now, and you've got to be on the right side of that change to figure out, you know, should I be growing a lot of soybeans, or should I convert to hemp, or should I do this or that or whatnot if I'm a farmer, for example?
Yeah, no, excellent thought. Thank you. As we all know, international trade has been with us for centuries and centuries, if not thousands of years, and has played a critical role in both political and military makeup of most regions of the world. Now, as we know, there are blocks of countries, the so-called industrialized countries, the developing countries, the underdeveloped countries. Jafer, you should maybe answer it first, and then the Captain. How do you see the effects of this, the new effects on these different blocks of developed or underdeveloped countries? What difference do you think it will have effect on them?
That's a great question, and I think Captain Naseer kind of answered that question very, very elegantly by saying that we look at it from a U.S.-centric point of view because this is where we live, and yes, the U.S. is self-sufficient in a bunch of things. Yeah, it's hard to, if the iPhone was manufactured in the U.S., it would cost $2,400. So, but we could make it, right? Yes, it would cost a lot of money, but there are the resources and infrastructure here to make things. Developed countries, for the most part, larger ones, can say that. Germany can kind of say that. Europe in aggregate can say that, but sub-Saharan Africa cannot. And this is a real issue because in sub-Saharan Africa, you have developing / nearly developed countries, one at least, and with good infrastructure, but you've also got very underdeveloped countries, and those folks are in trouble, right? And I'll draw the analogy to make life simple. When there is scarcity or when there is panic, what have we noticed in the US, right? All of a sudden, for example, in the banking crisis, right? What happened? A ton of money came in, the big got bigger. Pick a sector, pick an industry, the companies that were big and independent and had capital and had global reach became stronger, and the big got bigger. You see that in the markets today. If you looked at the market today, yeah, the indices are going to great lengths, but if you look at the average companies, they're really underperforming. So, other than the top 10 stock, there's nothing going on in the market, to be blunt. So take that analogy to countries, and it works. This is an economic principle. If you have relative strength, you are going to get stronger in a volatile environment, all else being equal. And that's what's happening. I predict coming out of this, the developed world is going to become stronger. The US will become stronger. The EU will become stronger. China, I think, will become stronger. But I think the rest of the world, for the most part, is going to have real problems trying to figure out, okay, we need to trade with other people. How are we going to trade? Who are we going to trade with? Does Africa try to get together and do its own work, which is very hard because their infrastructure is really poor. There isn't a whole lot of intra-Africa trade. Asia should be okay because there's a lot of local shipping and transport and whatnot that can be exploited, and infrastructure is being built. But this is a real issue. But I do think that you're going to have a divergence in development. Now, what does that mean? And I'll end with that. If you have, it's easy to say, okay, the rich will get richer and the poor will stay poor, and the difference will increase. What does that mean in the real world? In the real world, that means that the poor countries are going to get really annoyed, right? Because their people are going to say, wait a minute, how come oil has gotten more expensive? How come electricity has gotten more expensive? How come phones have gotten more expensive? I don't care about regionalization or globalization. I want a cheap phone. So I think there are some real political undercurrents here that need to be addressed. It's not just trade, it's not just the economy, because if you let it be, the rich and the developed will become more developed and richer. So, which I think is a very dangerous place 3 to 5 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jafer. Obviously, we're just talking about trade, but in reality, it spills into everything. And it's going to cascade all over the place. Captain Shahid, how about your thoughts on this?
I absolutely agree with Mr. Hasnain. This is not just a manufacturing issue or a regional issue. Every region has its own challenges. I mean, if you look at the world today, there's not only just regional capacity issues, but there are so many political issues between countries, and whether to get them to work together as a regional force, it's very difficult. I mean, one thing we know that in the Europe, most of the European countries, they don't get along with each other, but they still work together as an EU, you know. I mean, yes, an extreme example is Brexit when Britain decided to pull out. But if you look at any other region, whether you look at the Middle East or you look at Southeast Asia, and then there is the element of corruption in a lot of countries, you know. So any of the development funds that are there, they're not utilized in the way where it should be utilized, where local manufacturing can be promoted. So it's not one size fits all. And like Mr. Hasnain said, that the rich, I mean, even if you look at the analysis that is done by all the major, forces after the COVID-19 crisis, the rich have still gotten richer even here in the US, you know. I mean, look at the sales that Amazon is making, or because people are staying home, they want to buy more. It's very easy for them to sit on their computer, buy products, and as a result, you know, their sales have soared, you know. So those things are a factor, and whether the political will is there in those countries to work towards their own economy, towards the betterment of their own economy. Again, you know, like Mr. Hasnain said, soybean. Okay, if they have so much excess soybean, what do they do with that soybean? You know, they can just dump that into the sea, or give it as an aid to some country. But where does that put our farmer? You know, because if you dump it in sea, or whether you give it as aid to some poor countries, the farmer is at the losing end. You know, so they have to figure out what they need to do so that it's worth their time, whatever they're planting. You know. So it's a very, very difficult question to answer, and of course every region has its own challenges, and hopefully, like I said earlier, that the market will correct itself. You know, people will begin to understand and realize that what is working for them and what is not working for them, and eventually, you know, they take corrective action.
Thank you. No, I mean, these are excellent comments, and like I said before, it goes much more beyond than just trade, because politics and military issues and governance and the climate and everything else is so intertwined that you have to think about all of these together, because everything affects everything, so to say. I think we're running towards the end of our presentations. Do you have any maybe a couple of comments very quickly as to what you think the future will be, if you have your crystal ball handy anywhere? Jafer, I'll have your first comment, and then a Captain.
Sure. Well, look, I think what you're going to get is this regionalization. I think in that, from a very parochial standpoint, I live here in Chicago. I care about the US. I think the US is very well positioned. Geography is important. Lots of books have been written on this subject, and the US has great geography. It's just that, you know, it's a blessed kind of a country, right? We don't have to worry about our western borders or our eastern borders or this or that. So hopefully not an invasion from Canada, for God's sakes. But, you know, the fact is, we have this great luxury. We have water, we have land, we have the resources. We'll be okay. And that to me is very fundamental, because if you are okay in your basic needs, everything else follows. Then you can go buy stuff on Amazon and do this and that. But you got to feed yourself, and you got to have fresh water. The Chinese currently don't. And that to me, you know, there's four blocks: the Chinese, the Americans, the Europeans, and the Russians. You know, Russia is pretty self-sufficient in many respects. Europe is, believe it or not, I mean, it's a big place. They have a lot of resources on the eastern end. They produce a lot of agriculture. They have fresh water. They'll be fine. The US, fine. China is a massive entity with a lot of ambition, with a lot of confidence, and they are realistically resource poor. So they are going to have to figure out this regionalization. I mean, by definition, the biggest beneficiary of just-in-time inventorying of open global trade has been China. And they need to now figure out, essentially, if the WTO is going into a new phase of its evolution and is getting all regionalized and whatnot, how does China stay strong, stay stable, given that it needs fresh water resources, it needs food. So all these things, the Chinese are, I know I work with Chinese folks, they are very aware of their weaknesses and they are working on solving them as we speak. Internally, they're developing alliances and whatnot, but internally they're saying we ought to start growing more food one way or the other. We ought to get more fresh water one way or the other, which is why they're so worried about pollution. Their worry about pollution is partly health and partly water. They need the resource to be a stable country. So that's where I think this goes. I think it's in a way a very exciting time because there's a lot of change. It's not business as usual. And, you know, we got to pay real close attention. I think for better or for worse, the next few years, we can golf later on. But for the next few years, on the weekends, in the afternoons when the day is nice, let's focus on where things are going. Let's get the answers right, and we'll all do really well. But I think the answer is regionalization. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We're human beings. We like to trade. We just like to trade with people that we can drive to if we have to.
Great. Thank you. Captain, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the challenge, like I said, is going to be based on which region you're talking about, you know. Like Mr. Hasnain said, US may be okay, which I hope it is because we live here and all of our you know, sincerity and all of our love for this country, we want nothing but the very best for us, you know. Yeah, you do hear that, okay, we have moved our jobs to China or elsewhere, but the issue is that we're still the world's largest economy. We are still very, very powerful. But if you, I mean, Canada to our north is our good friend. But the moment you start to go south, you can see, you know, Mexico is a poor country. If you go further south, despite all the resources that in the southern hemisphere in South America that they have, with the amount of oil they have, with the iron ore and things like that on ships, you know, when I used to go to South America, they are so full of resources. But look at the condition of the people there. It's so poor. Their currency is has always been very, very, very vulnerable. China, of course, has made significant progress. And I think Chinese are very smart people. They figure out things in a way where the rest of the world later on realizes that, okay, they were ahead of the game, you know. And I think one of the things which is also relevant to us as our organization of Central Asian Productivity Research Center is the Belt and Road Initiative. When China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, they knew what they were doing, and they have almost about 60 countries that bought into that project. And they were going full speed with that project, and this whole COVID-19 situation has thrown that off a little bit, but I think they're going to get back on their feet and they're going to, you know, start running again, because in order for them not to be exposed to any you know, weakness, that Belt and Road Initiative is very, very critical and very important for China.
Thank you for your thoughts. Gentlemen, I think we are out of time. I want to thank you for sharing your international trade expertise in this. And I would also like to thank Christopher for organizing this conference. I'm sure your collective experience and knowledge will be of great interest to people who are interested in what's happening in the world. Thank you very much. Thank you for being part of this conference.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am proud, very, very proud to announce the opportunity for the city of Chicago and the Chicago region to have a new World Trade Centers. Hello, my name is Bill Latta. I've been involved with the World Trade Center for some 20 years, and I am proud because we finally have developed a World Trade Center with the help of our developer, Paul McDermott. Before we move forward and tell you about the new World Trade Center, I'd like to give you a little brief history on what the World Trade Center has been and what it should be for the future. In 1985, the state of Illinois bought the license from the World Trade Center Association in New York for the development of a World Trade Center. In conjunction with Quaker Oats in Chicago, we were going to build the tallest building in the country. Again, Neil Hartigan, who was our lieutenant governor and attorney general at the time, took the helm and was leading the development. But in 1985, the real estate crash or recession took place and it didn't get built. But Mr. Hartigan had a vision. He wanted the World Trade Center to symbolize what Chicago was, and that was the leader in many, many, many industries, and connect those industries to the rest of the world. So the World Trade Center Association is a licensed body of 385 World Trade Centers globally. Before the advent of the cell phone and FaceTime and Zoom, we had to have locations around the world where we could buy and sell products and communicate directly to those markets. And the World Trade Center fit that bill. We were able to, for example, talk to the World Trade Center in Cali, Colombia, and negotiate coffee prices direct from Cali, from Colombia, to the distributors here in Chicago. So those distributors would then push it out into Kroger's, A&P, Jewel, and even Bob Mariano's market. That's a simple way to understand what a World Trade Center really is all about. We facilitate trade, but more importantly, we facilitate trade both on the export and the import, where most organizations, government affiliated, cannot support the inbound trade mechanism. They can only support the export of product. So we fit a niche. We're a non-for-profit organization, and we do a great job. We give you that tender, loving care that you need when you need to connect to a market that you would like to expand your product line into. So that's where we were. The World Trade Center Association in New York wants the World Trade Centers to establish a presence, a destination location. So when you get into a cab in Chicago, take me to the World Trade Center, they know exactly where to go. Take me to the Sears Tower. Again, I'm Chicago, so it'll never be the Willis Tower in my book. But, you know, you get the idea. Take me to the Hancock Building. Take me to the World Trade Center. Building a building costs an awful lot of money, which again is the reason why we're making this announcement. This has taken about 5 years of my hard work to establish with a true developer an opportunity for us to build a building. 2,200 West Devon Road is going to be the address for the new World Trade Center. It is a marvelous 46-acre site, right 5 minutes off of the tarmac of the O'Hare Field, within 15 minutes of downtown Chicago. It will attract all international business to Chicago again and establish us as the leader not only in manufacturing, aviation, transportation, education, all the things that Chicago has been known for forever. It will reestablish us as the king of the United States. Yeah, it's a terrible thing to say, king of the United States, terrible. Anyways, what we have done is we've, with some great architects and some great people, a series of plans to make this development work. So I'm going to spin around and show you our drawings here. You'll see here we have the property. We have an anchor tenant as Hyatt International Hotels in the center here. We have this development along the expressway 94 going north, which is right over here, of commercial buildings. This would be the World Trade Center building #1 and a series of buildings behind that going along 94, with a catwalk going across from building #1 World Trade Center to the Riverside Casino in Des Plaines. So we would go over the expressway and we'd use our convention space and they tie the two units together. Again, the World Trade Center is about cooperation, building bridges. Okay, we build bridges, and we've been in negotiations with the new owners of the casino to do this. We've talked to the Department of Transportation to get this done, and this will just benefit the city of Des Plaines, which is 1 click north of the entertainment district for our neighbors here to the south, Rosemont. On the north side of the property will be residential, commercial condominiums, as you can see here. So this will be a mixed-use development around a beautiful 25 acre lake. So what I'd like to do is show the property where we're at and show you visually what we're going to transform and how we're going to do that. This is, you can see the parking garage, which will have the bridge or the link between our property and the casino. Along this side of 294 will be the commercial development, with the first building being the World Trade Center. And on this side of the development will be all residential, condominium space, all the way to the back. So the benefit is we have this beautiful 26 acre lake setting, which will be used for hydroelectric power. And the idea here is to give it this mixed use and develop the smart city concept for the World Trade Center. What is a smart city concept? We're going to have Paul McDermott discuss that in the next segment. But it's just a teaser. Smart city is everything connected. It is the future of development. It will allow, on a simple basis, the Coke machines in every building to talk to the distributors so they know not to have to bring 14 cases of Coca-Cola when they only need 10 cans. It will be as simple as the lighting being, the lighting and the energy use being moderated based on peak hours and then drop down to be used with less energy being used in the evening hours when less people are here. It will monitor the people inside the buildings. It will monitor the people outside the buildings. The communication between the buildings and the residents will always be there. So it will be 5G connected all the way throughout. It takes a little bit of work. It takes a big, big initiative. It takes an awful lot of thinking forward. And that's what we're all about. We would love to bring most of the business and the international community from downtown Chicago. We have 87 consul generals, the second largest outside of New York, where the UN is, in Chicago. And we'd like to bring those consul generals and their offices and their staff here. So we have a one-stop shop opportunity for international clients to come to O'Hare, to get off the plane, get brought right over to our World Trade Center and do their business, conduct their business, and help each other. Our next presenter will be Paul McDermott, and he will walk you through what that development will look like and what the World Trade Center's component in that development will be.
Thank you, Bill, for that great introduction. Really do appreciate that. And Bill and I are going to be working very, very closely on the whole World Trade Center piece of the new smart city that we're going to be developing near O'Hare, which we're calling O'Hare Imagine. And the Imagine moniker came from our research. And a few years ago, we looked at the UN's research on the number of people that are going to be moving into urban areas over the next 50 years. It's like 70 or 75% of the world's population. And we started, when we started our research, that was when crime statistics were going off the charts in Chicago, a lot of murders and that kind of thing. And we thought, you know, we cannot let this happen anymore. Real estate development has to play a part. And how do we do that? How do we disrupt the real estate and the approach to it? And we looked at who can resolve city problems or urban problems. And the government has turned out not to be the way to go, whether you're talking federal or local. And certainly government doesn't have the money to do it. Private industry doesn't have the economic model to do it. Not-for-profits can't do it. Universities can't do it. So who's left? Well, we looked at it and said, well, geez, it's the real estate developer, because he brings all of those people together, all those disparate agendas. But the typical real estate developer operates on the concept that I find a nice corner. I think of the market that my building could do. I build a building and I sell it off when it's done, and I'm gone and I'm on to the next thing. And we said that that's no longer sustainable. And we have to look at real estate as a platform for generating significant economic and social improvement. And so we broke it down. We started looking at the research on what makes communities and humans thrive. We looked at the economic models that, you know, with my 40 years in the real estate business, I've seen an awful lot of approaches to this, but nothing disruptive. And we realized that that's what we had to do. We had to disrupt not only the financial model and approach to real estate development, but we also had to look at what the end result is. And we've come up with a plan to develop smart cities that generate significant social and economic impact, and a sustainable social and economic impact, by the way. And we've had a very large approval of this concept, and we're working with a lot of governments around the world who are very, very interested in this approach, because what the investors, what financiers realize is that unless you have a better educated local community, unless you have a happy community, that it's not going to drive good business, and it's not going to drive the local economy. So we had to weave those two things together and say, you can have good business unless you've got an educated workforce. You can't have a sustainable workforce unless people feel good about where they live, about where they feel good about what they're doing. So we broke it all down. We took a couple of years off. We did nothing but intensive research into what makes humans thrive, what makes communities and cities thrive. And so we looked at how we matched those things. And we looked at the various economic models and financial models for real estate. And it turned out that I had developed what they later call the circular economy, which we weren't at those days, but it's taking all of the disparate agendas of all of the people that come into a real estate development and making them all work together. So I'm not fighting the local community. I'm not fighting the private business. I'm not fighting the university. I'm using what they need to drive the whole thing and make it work. So we broke it down, we put it back together again, and we realized, no, real estate is a platform for generating significant, sustainable economic and social impact. But a real estate developer, in order to make this work, has to look at it a different way. When we started approaching the city of Chicago about developing a project downtown Chicago, we looked at a number of ways. We met with the community, and we didn't just meet with the community as most developers do. We set up a charrette for an hour. People come in, they look at the plans, they say, well, this is a great thing, but we have really no impact. You know, a developer may change a stop sign, he may add a crosswalk, maybe he decides he adds a little more retail or less retail or whatever it is, reduces the number of apartments, but that doesn't really create the sustainable impact that we're looking at. And again, there's a ton of research and science that's been put into this, but nobody looks at that because they just want to build a building, they want to make their fee, and they want to go away. And that's not our approach to this at all. So our approach is more long-term, and this is what the financiers and investors like. The fact that our project is about long-term sustainability and growth, so that our projects are built in such a way that they continue to build on each other, and they're more authentic and they're more grounded in the actual community. And this is another way that we're trying to disrupt the social impact and development in an urban setting, is that most developers approach it in the way that we're going to destroy the community in order to save it. Well, that's not, to me, that's not sustainable. That's not really doing anything. I'm replacing middle class or low income people with gentrification. And that to me isn't solving anything. You're moving the problem to the suburbs or to a different part of the city, or whatever. So what we do is we look at a large scale site, and it's anywhere from 30 acres to 1,000 acres, and we're looking at projects like that around the world now. And we look at the local community first. We send a due diligence team in for 3 or 4 months to really understand the local community. And I'll give you a for instance. You know, we can talk about this all day long about going to wherever country. We've got over 50 countries that have asked us to develop projects in their community because of this dual approach. And the fact that this will be a sustainable, both environmentally and financially, approach. The project was on the south side of Chicago. Now, I've lived in Chicago 30 years or something, and you know, I've lived downtown, and I think I know the community, but I don't know anything about the south side, for instance, not as much as I should. So we got involved with the community. We went to the church, we went to the schools, we had dinners and lunches and just all kinds of coffee clatches and the rest of it with people. We really got to know these people. And I think that's part of it too, is that a developer has to take the responsibility for understanding the communities he's going to work in. So that's the first thing we do. We really, really understand the community. And so we were developing our concept around the social and economic impact. And I was at a particular, one particular meeting in a professor's home, by the way, overlooking the site. And he said, you know, Paul, this sounds all well and good, but, you know, you guys are going to build this and you're going to walk away. And now all of a sudden, somebody else is going to take it over and it's going to become something different. No matter what you plan for, it's going to become something different. And the light bulb went off in my head. And I said, you know what, we have to maintain ownership of these things in order to maintain the goals, in order to maintain the reason why we did it. So that is part of our structure, is that as we develop these things, we're also going to take a long-term approach. And guess what? The financiers, the investors, they loved it because we are taking responsibility for what we're doing. We're not just going to build something and walk away from it. We're going to build something that lasts, that builds on itself, that creates opportunities for everyone. And then that is part of the situation. A part of our program is developing opportunities for the community, for the businesses, for the technology, for the universities. And I'll give you an example using the O'Hare site, which is our first site now. It's by O'Hare. It's 5 minutes from O'Hare. It's not far from downtown, but we want to create a microcosm of a city that people will come to O'Hare and say, I got to imagine O'Hare before we go downtown, because this is going to be the coolest place in Chicago. And so we start with the ideas. I want to create a place so cool that I want to live there. I want to have my office there. And if you're genuine about that, it's like anything else. It's like whether you're cooking or whether you're making music or whatever, if you do something that really makes you happy, it's going to translate rather than watering it down. And I think that's a lot of developers, a lot of architects and people involved in real estate tend to do that too. They start with a lofty goal, and before you knew it, it's watered down and watered down and watered down to it's a mediocre development with mediocre architecture, and nobody cares. We want to make a focal point. We want to make a statement. We want to make this the coolest place to work and live because of all of the other advantages that we're bringing. And that's where Smart City came in. We said, look, it's really cool to do nice architecture and create some social impact programs and that kind of thing. But what makes it really for the future? And that is the smart city approach. Now, most developers get this wrong, and they've had major failures because most of the people driving these smart cities are tech companies. And tech companies are all about their technology. So Google failed miserably in Toronto because it was all about Google. It had very little to do with the community, with anything beyond what can we do to make Google cool in Toronto? And they lost. And frankly, we were looking at a project at the same time, literally down the river from Google, and we were hearing from all kinds of people that they were doing it really, we were going about it in a very wrong way, and that is the traditional way. Here's our gift to you, community. What do you think? And instead of getting with the community, saying, what do you need? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? And again, creating those opportunities. And that's where urban environments have problems with low income and middle income people because they lack the opportunity. They lack education opportunity. They lack sports. They lack job opportunities. They lack job training. So our program has to start with that. What does the community need to make it thrive? Does it need a park? Does it need a sports center? Does it need training facilities? And we're talking about not, old training, but we're talking about training for future jobs. You're training for the future. Getting kids off the street is really important, obviously. Looking at the riots that happen along with the protests. How do we adapt what we're calling a district, because that's what it ends up being. It's almost Renaissance-like in the fact that you could put a wall around it because our projects are going to have everything in it: medical, education, jobs, technology, and the rest of it. And so it's got to be kind of a self-contained unit. And one of the pieces of the smart city is mobility, and the fact that you don't need a car. One of my big complaints is commuting. I think it's not only a waste of energy and of time, but it also creates a lot of pollution. So we create an environment where people can walk to work, they can walk to the store, to the school, et cetera, et cetera. So we look first at what the community is all about. We look at the arts and culture. And arts and culture, according to the research, is what drives creativity. It drives emotional intelligence. Why do people move to Austin? Why do people move to San Francisco or New York or Berlin or London? Because of the arts and culture. That's what makes us human. So we start with that. And it's not just about putting a poster on the wall and playing old-fashioned music. It's much deeper than that. It's about bringing artists into it. It's about actually bringing the community into the project, not pushing them out of it. And that's where the gentrification comes in. So we learn about the culture, we embrace the culture and build on that. And that also creates that uniqueness. So every smart city we develop, whether it's in Paris or Tunisia or Moscow, and by the way, these are all places I've asked us to develop our smart cities, or any of the other 50 countries we've been talking to, by starting with the arts and culture, you make it unique to that community. Although we have the same process for building the project, and not only physically, but programmatically, but it also grounds it in that community. So the community feels like, oh my God, this is part of us. This is not something, the buildings may be new, but it's really part of their culture already. So we start with that, and then we look and see, what kinds of businesses. So we look at the local market. So we look at the local culture, we look at what the needs and goals of those people are, and then we start building on that. What's missing in the market? What drives the current market? How can we build on the current market? What's missing in the market that we can start inputting new businesses and new technology, and then so that starts building. And when I talk about putting the disparate groups together, I'm talking about the fact that what do companies need when they move to a new location? Well, they're looking for educated workforce. So that's where the universities come in, because that becomes a pipeline to those companies. Now, what companies are you looking at? Now, we approach technology companies and say, look, we're creating a playground for you. And this is where it all becomes all meshed in. So one of our secret sauces is the fact that when we build a smart city, we're building the technology in to support and enhance the programs we're doing. So in other words, nobody cares if you get a pizza faster, or your Wi-Fi is a little faster than it was over there. It's much bigger than that. So we first develop what we're calling forward compatible infrastructure. And we call forward compatible infrastructure because everyone knows that technology now changes every 3 to 4 years. Now, cities can't keep up with that because you're ripping up sidewalks and you're ripping up streets and you're doing all kinds of crazy things. But what if we create a plan that allows technology to be changed out in 3 to 4 years? In other words, we're deliberately building an area to accept newer and newer technology so that it continues to build. Well, that's the first thing we do. And that again is the technology is now not driving the development as Google has done, or as they did in Masdar City in the middle of the desert in Abu Dhabi, or Sangdu City they did in South Korea. Terrible. Well, I'll tell you, Masdar City was built $20 billion later. No one moved there because they forgot the first thing about real estate, and that is location. They built this, we will build it and they will come thing in the middle of the desert. And guess what? Nobody came. It's still sitting there. $20 billion investment, buildings empty, nobody's there. I think one company moved in because they did some of the engineering. Sangdu City made the other mistake. They built these huge concrete monoliths and then put gigantic parks and then put highways through it. It's totally anti-human. According to interviews with the few people that have moved in, they love their apartments because of all the technology, but nobody ever goes out. Nobody meets their neighbors. They forgot the whole community side, putting highways through the buildings, using gigantic parks. All of that is against all of the research in terms of what makes people feel good about where they live. So what we do again is we take the technology. How do we support? How do we enhance the human side of things using technology to help humans, not just create faster pizza and a faster, Uber or whatever it is. So that's kind of the secret to that. And then so going back, and that's why I say, guys, that there are so many aspects to what we're doing. I could talk for days on this. Anyway, so we have the forward compatible infrastructure, and then we have this the circular economy that we built. So we bring in technology companies. We say, look, we're going to give you a playground. And they say, what do you mean by that? Well, we're going to set up this district so that you can test and upgrade your technology. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you go into the built environment, it's very expensive. It's politically difficult. It'll take years sometimes to test up technology in the built environment, because again, you're a city that was built like Chicago or New York, whatever, built centuries ago. It takes a lot to implement that technology or to test it up. And by the time you get through the expense, by the time you get through the politics, by the time you get to set it up, some 18-year-old kid in his basement has now surpassed you because he went beyond all that and said, you know what, I've tested it all, it's gone. He's gone to market. He's already blowing you out the door. So what we create is that district to allow technology companies to utilize that to test their equipment. So everything is, the infrastructure is built to support those kinds of testing and upgrading and that kind of thing. So that's how we approach tech companies, and they're super excited about this concept because now we're building something that helps with their product marketing and that kind of stuff. Every project we're going to build will be a showcase for the technology. It'll be showcase for all the programming we do. It'll be showcase for the universities, et cetera, et cetera. So we create that circular economy by bringing in tech companies who want to be near a tech university. Tech university wants to be near the tech companies, and so it all works hand in hand. Now we introduce the training so that adults or whoever aren't able to go to school will get that tech training now, whether it's coding or whatever it is, and so it all meshes together. But it's a very complicated process. It takes a lot of work and a lot of upfront planning. And this is the one thing I learned 40 years ago. I was the first person in the Chicago area to get this project management Institute certification. And the first thing they taught us was that the Japanese model of projects is a very interesting model. And that is that the planning is twice as long as the project itself. The idea behind that is you can account for nearly every thing that could go wrong with the project. The planning up front is significant because it quickens the construction time frame. And this is what Americans and a lot of other traditional developers don't understand. But by expanding that planning phase, you shrink the construction phase because you plan for all the what ifs, you've planned for flexibility, you've planned for all kinds of things that happen. So the planning is really significant for us, and that's where we spend a ton of time on that and figuring out the circular economy, figuring out the local community and the rest of it. So jumping back to O'Hare, using the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center becomes an attraction, obviously. And so what we do around the World Trade Center is we build the businesses and the technology companies we want to attract around the World Trade Center. Being adjacent to O'Hare is a huge opportunity because O'Hare being the busiest airport in the US, being the crossroads of the US, having so many consulate generals and ambassadors in Chicago makes it ideal. Having so many road warriors in Chicago, architectural firms, engineering firms, food companies, medical groups, et cetera, pharmaceutical companies, it makes it ideal for the O'Hare area having a development like this. So we're planning the market for that O'Hare project, which we're calling Imagine O'Hare, to reflect that opportunity for everyone involved, whether it's the community, the market, or the technology companies that we're going to be inviting into the project, and using that World Trade Center as sort of the centerpiece of the program. I think that, again, that we're really excited by the opportunity. We actually think the location is better than downtown Chicago, and we're going to create something that we think is, when people get off the plane, they're going to want to come to Imagine O'Hare before they go downtown, because it's going to be the coolest place with the coolest architecture. We didn't even get into that, but we have a rendering, I think, that the Bill's shown already, that will show some of the ideas that went into it, but that's already 3 or 4 years old. We have some new ideas. Now we have to adapt to future pandemics, protests, that kind of thing, and social distancing. So now we take what's happened in the world lately, and we have to bring that into the planning, and how do we adjust for those kinds of things, and make it truly smart. I'll give you one more, for instance. As we meet with the governments around the world, they look at Dubai. They say, "Oh my goodness, Dubai, that's a smart city." We say, "Well, Dubai is not so smart," and here's why. They have really cool architecture, no doubt about it. They've got some cool technology, no doubt about it. They've got some forward-thinking people, but people who live in Dubai are miserable. Unless you're very wealthy, it's a terrible place to live. There's no local community. There's no loyalty there. A lot of transplanted people work there for a short time and leave right away. They tend to build cities just to build cities. So cities are sitting empty in the desert. It's really bizarre. And I've talked to the head of real estate for the Dubai government, and he said, well, you know, I said, why are you doing that? You're cannibalizing the market. If you buy, for instance, if you buy $1 million condo in Dubai today, next year that'll be worth maybe $100,000 because they're building so many condominiums every day. And as you see it, so they'll build a city down the road, and they'll say, why are you building a city? Well, America's got a lot of cities, but they don't understand that those were organic. And they were built because that was the end of the railroad or whatever. And then they built up over time. But you don't just build a city and then move people to it. And this is part of what's not smart about what they're doing. And they're not creating real opportunities for communities. They're not enhancing the culture and arts because there isn't any in the desert. So it's not very smart. And if people are miserable, that's not very smart either. So people living in Chicago or New York or whatever, smart to me means much more than just cool technology. It's got to be smart. It's got to be for the future. It's got to be, people have got to feel good living there. People have got to feel like there's always opportunities to learn new things or go dancing or whatever the hell it is that they want to do. And so that's to me what is smart. Building a city that people want to be in, people want to grow in, people want their kids and their grandkids to be happy in. And so it has to be holistic. And that's another term we like to use because we like these programs and these projects to be holistic. And that's something that real estate developers don't really care about for the most part. I'm overgeneralizing, but for the most part, standard real estate is find a corner, build a building, take your fee and run. And it's not for the future. It's not thinking about the community or the context of which you're building in. And I can cite 100 examples in downtown Chicago, but anyway, so I'm not here to say bad things about other developers because that's just the way of the world, and that's what their sweet spot is. But we're taking a wholly different approach, and frankly, we would love to see other developers do this approach too, because we can't do over 200 projects in 50 countries. It's like 5 lifetimes. Each smart city project will probably take a minimum of 5 years because it's so complicated, both from a planning standpoint and from a development standpoint. So each project is a very lengthy project. They probably started $1.5 billion, so it's not something that any developer can do. It requires an awful lot of manpower and work and financing, and people willing to finance these projects. And that's why it's, you know, if it were so easy, everybody'd be doing it. So we're really looking forward to this project at O'Hare. Again, Imagine O'Hare. We're really looking forward to working with the World Trade Center people. We think it's very exciting. We're going to be working with the World Trade Center people in a project we're going to be doing in Washington, D.C., I believe Paris, and numbers of other cities across the globe, and continuing to build on that model. And each model will be a different generation. We'll learn more and more things, and which I think is one of the exciting things about what we're doing is all about improving, and being flexible in our approach and that kind of thing. Again, most developers are kind of a cookie cutter approach, but our whole approach is how do we build it better? How do we improve people's lives more? How do we really react to what's happening and the future? And that's why we make them environmentally sustainable and financially sustainable so that they can carry into the future without being, oh my God, so last year. Anyway, so again, I can talk about this all day long, but I think that you're getting the gist of it, and I hope I've imparted some new ideas through this discussion, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And I'll now hand it back to Bill, who has to take all that I've said and bring it back to home. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that presentation. We appreciate your effort. We cannot wait. We're a partner, and we look forward to the future. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much for attending this virtual conference. I hope you enjoyed the content and the speakers as much as I did. I'm excited listening to what they had to say. I know we're staring at some challenges, but there are benefits. And the role of CAPRC, as I said initially, is to guide the Central Asia Pacific countries to their destiny, strategic intentions. You can help us by going to our website, caprc.org, and contributing what you can. We are a not-for-profit organization, and we depend on volunteers 100%, as well as donations from folks like you. Again, thank you very, very much, and wish you all the best until we meet again. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anthony Preston, and I am the Executive Director of Global Programs at Northern Illinois University. On behalf of everyone at the Central Asian Productivity Research Center, thank you for joining our virtual seminar today. We hope that you and your loved ones continue to stay healthy and safe during this global pandemic. We also hope that this virtual seminar was valuable to you as we discuss the impacts of COVID-19 across the globe. There is no doubt that COVID-19 has impacted all of our lives. As leaders, we must continue to pivot and adapt to the ever-changing world around us. Perseverance and adaptability are so important, and we must continue to find ways to collaborate and work together. This past year, we sadly had to cancel our Silk Road conference that brought so many leaders from around the globe together. We plan on rescheduling this conference once it is safe to do so, and continue our long-standing tradition of bringing programs about the Silk Road together. As we discuss the impacts of COVID-19 across the globe, we hope that you found value in all of our sessions today, whether it be about global trade disruptions, logistical challenges, or new innovations such as the plans of starting a new smart city and World Trade Center. As always, the Central Asian Productivity Research Center stands ready to contribute and help you and your organization as you continue to combat the new challenges and proceed with new innovations. We want to thank all of our presenters and moderators today for contributing to this virtual seminar. We also would like to give a very special thanks to Chris Wager and his son Chris for creating this seminar and putting it together. Thank you so much for all of your hard work and your dedication and commitment to the organization. In closing, from all of us at the Central Asian Productivity Research Center, we want to thank you again for attending this seminar. We look forward to the day that we can see you again in person and hope that you and your loved ones stay healthy and safe. Thank you so much and have a great day.